During the program tonight, we'd like you to use the chat window for any questions or technical issues. And we ask that you remember to stay muted during the program. We will be recording the program and posting it on the Jane Addams website about a week later. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Suzie Garfield. She has degrees in mathematics and literature. She has a PhD in humanities and comparative literature from the Johns Hopkins University. She's an MBA and certified project management professional. And she is a teacher, a trainer, a storyteller, a coach, and a mentor. So now it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Suzie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I've been looking forward to this for months, and I'm really excited to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, storytelling, and how you can put it to work for you. By the way, I appreciate that everybody's muted now. There will be plenty of participation in this program, and obviously, I invite you to unmute yourself at that point. In general, if I'm just talking and you have a question, I would like you to put it in the chat, and Kate will be monitoring it, and Elaine. And if something needs to be addressed right away, they'll interrupt. Otherwise, we will hold questions and discussions for a few particular points where we do have wider participation. So, as I said, I'm delighted to be here, and let's get going. Now, when I was a student at Mills College in Oakland, California, my friends and I frequently cited the school's unofficial slogan, "Remember who you are and what you represent." It was years later. I had completed my degree, I had graduated, I had moved off campus, and that's when I learned that Mills didn't claim exclusive rights to the expression, "Remember who you are and what you represent." It really shows up in English soccer culture, of all places, and even Louis Armstrong had used the expression as the lyric and as the title of a song that he recorded. And I like to think that Satchmo learned about the expression from Dave Brubeck when he collaborated with Dave Brubeck. And Brubeck had studied music with Darius Milhaud at Mills College, so he would have known the expression. And I think that this chain of connections really just confirms that there's really only 6 people in the world. The rest is done with mirrors and modems. So I care a lot about remembering who you are and what you represent. And not just because I went to Mills. I care because when you tell other people, and especially when you show other people who you are and what you represent, well, you just might reach them deeply. You might become a role model. You might influence or change a life. And I know because 2 particular impressions like this reached me very deeply a long time ago, and they have helped shape and determine my life ever since. The impact, the influence have been enormous. Now, when I was very small, I idolized an older cousin of mine, and she went to college when I was a toddler. A few years later, I had already started grade school by then. I saw a movie about a young woman who went to college, and the combination of those 2 impressions hit me like a 1-2 time-delayed knockout punch. I was impressed. I was set. I was going to go to college. And in my family in those days, not everybody went to college. It wasn't guaranteed. Some of us, like my cousin who I idolized, and like me, we went, but a lot of my cousins didn't. We were a generation in transition. Now, it seems to me as I look back that at first I really didn't care much about some possible post-secondary education that might happen 8 to 10 years in the future. Oh, I didn't even know what post-secondary education was. And as a toddler and even as a grade schooler, I wasn't pining curiously to read things and study things, to learn things and know things. I was just hero worshiping some attractive characters. One of them, excuse me, real life, and one of them fictional. And that's also a distinction I probably didn't understand very much at the time. But over time, I found my curiosity. And when I found my curiosity, well, then I longed to understand letters and arts and sciences, and I longed to learn things and to contribute to knowledge. I longed to get articulate and comfortable addressing an audience. I learned to become the person I am today. And finally, by the time I graduated high school, I understood what post-secondary education promised and why it beckoned to me. And then I would go to the University of Illinois and study math. And a little bit later, I would go to Mills and to Johns Hopkins, and I'd study literature and humanities. And then even after I became a working professional, I would go to business school as well. So the outcomes, first of being seriously charmed, and then of being seriously influenced, these outcomes have done more than anything I can think of to helm my life and to get me here today. Now, I would imagine that you may or may not ever influence anyone as dramatically as my role models influenced me, and you may or may not even realize it, but you certainly influence people. Certainly in your work with AAUW, but I suspect also in the rest of your life as well. So let's talk a little bit about influence and how you establish it. Frequently, you establish influence by showing people exactly what concerned us at Mills College, who you are and what you represent. And now I'll speak as a storyteller, because as a storyteller, I think a lot, I understand a lot, and I know a lot about stories and utterance and communication in general. And tonight, I want us to use story and the storyteller's toolkit to look at and possibly to revamp what concerned us at Mills, how you can influence people by showing them who you are and what you represent. Now, I want to start by distinguishing two characteristics, two components of every story and every communication you make. There's the content and there's the person who delivers the content. They're two separate things, and you're always providing both of them. You've possibly experienced really liking someone, being drawn to them, but then when you hear what their concerns and their ideas are, well, you don't like that quite as much. Or maybe you really like ideas and content, but then you see the person, you don't like the person that much. And what you're experiencing then is two separate things happening. We're going to talk about both of them. Well, first is content. Content is the message you state. You deliver content explicitly with what you say or otherwise provide. And content changes from one communication to the next. It's ephemeral. But even so, it's critically important. It's usually why you communicate in the first place. It's what you want to get across. But as critical as content is, we won't focus on content tonight. We'll talk about it primarily in contrast to the other really critical piece of every communication, and that's the person who delivers the content. And in your case, that's you. Now, just as you deliver content explicitly, you establish who you are as a speaker implicitly. It's not what you say. It's not even so much how you say it. It's what oozes out around everything you say whenever you speak, whenever you communicate. That ooze distinguishes you as a speaker. Now, it's true, of course, that we and our worlds, we're always changing and evolving and morphing. We're never the same moment to moment. So even though we change moment to moment, the extent of that change doesn't begin to match how much content changes from one communication to the next. And we recognize personal continuity. The person is communicator persists. And I call that enduring presence. What persists, I call it your voice or your storytelling voice. Your voice reveals your personality, your presence, your attitude, your character, your perspective. Except it's probably a little bit more accurate to say that your voice reveals aspects of your personality and your presence and your character and attitude and your perspective, because you are a whole person. And the complexity, the subtlety, the nuance that define you, well, these make it impossible for you to communicate everything about yourself in one tidy, neat, single, consistent little package. And at the same time, with all these aspects, it would be very easy to communicate different things at different times, but you want to communicate primarily the same person every time you speak. And so you have to decide, what is it you want your voice to communicate and convey? And then you have to get those choices across consistently whenever you speak. Okay, what I want to do now is look at what my voice is telling you about me. So you're going to have to be unmuting yourself to communicate and to talk. And I'm going to ask you, what do you know about me or think you know about me from my voice? Now, I don't want you to tell me that I value education, that I tell stories. I've already told you that in my content explicitly. I want to know what you're picking up about me through my voice. So please feel free to unmute yourself and try to coordinate who participates when, and tell everybody some of the things you think you know about me.
Can I go first?
Please.
Okay, I'm Monica. Thank you for this wonderful conversation and insight. What I am hearing when you're telling your story is you're confident and you're very clear. And that story is very true about what you're telling when you're telling your story.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I haven't given quite this talk before. This is specialized, customized for this group. And I didn't realize that I was possibly asking people to praise me. I appreciate the kind things you're saying, but if you're picking up negatives, you're free to communicate those and share those as well. So thank you. Thank you, Monica. You want to say anything else now? Otherwise, we can pick up on somebody else.
I think I'm done.
Somebody else, please.
Well, I would say from your comments that you valued education, you valued your educational experiences, and not only, I didn't get so much from it classroom learning, although I'm inferring that because of your subsequent academic career, but you mentioned your friends and the lifelong friends that you made and the friendships that you forged when you were at Mills. So I think that that comes through, and to be able to remember those positively, and presuming probably that you still keep in touch with some of those women, says a lot about your ability to make and sustain friendships.
Thank you. Anyone else? There's 20 of us in the room now. Certainly somebody else has impressions.
I just got here, so so I missed most of what you said.
Well, it's being recorded. It's being recorded.
Yeah, so yeah, I will have to go back and listen to form my opinion, but yeah, I'm thinking as people are talking.
Well, then you have not heard my content. So any impression you have on me is strictly through the implicit communication, which is what we're really talking about.
Mhm.
So you're fully engaged at this point. The rest is just history. You can pick it up.
It's Diane. I'd like to say that it comes across that you have definitely studied the field of communication because you are good at it. And I also like some of the powerful word choices that you use. Every so often you sprinkling something that's got a little bit more pizzazz to it in the language that you choose. So I do appreciate that.
You know, I'm glad you heard that. Choice of the words and the way I express myself is definitely something that's very important to me. That's why I speak about these kinds of topics. That's why I tell stories. That's why I work with people and coach them on their communication, and why I do some political editorial work. And I'm constantly arguing with them about what they're saying and how they're saying it, because I think a lot of times it could be improved. I really appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to move us along a little bit because I also want us to take a look at your voices. I want each of you to think about what you think your voice says about you and your colleagues' voices say about them, and what they can say and what you want them to say. So I invite some more participation and discussion, but focusing on your voice and the voices you hear in your colleagues. And this might be a time to let some of your colleagues know how their voices communicate things that you also know about them from other experiences.
This is Diane Forsyth, Northwest Suburban, actually. And I wanted to let you know, first of all, I'm going to hop back, even though you told me not to. I'm still going to hop back and say that from your voice, I can hear deliberation. I can hear that you are choosing your words, whether they're small words, big words, complicated words, whatever they are, you are very deliberately choosing them. In other words, you're not just blathering on, which is easy to do. It's very difficult to choose something deliberately and not end up with a lot of ums, ers, or blank spaces, which I am not hearing a lot of blank spaces. So thank you for that. I also hear, and I hope that I do it as well, because I've been practicing on that for years when speaking with business colleagues, that I very rarely, hopefully very rarely, tend to go up. In other words, that was a sentence that had a period, but my voice went up. Granted, I'm Scandinavian, and the Swedes and the Finns, we tend to go up with a lilt. However, it is much more confident, I think, to be finishing a sentence with a downward slope to the voice and a period at the end.
Yes, women in particular very frequently raise their voice at the end, and you get a lot of people pointing that out. It's almost become an easy given point or tip to give to people because it is so prevalent.
And it tells me that someone's unsure. They're always kind of asking the audience, right? Is that right? Is that correct? Instead of being very confident about, yes, I am correct.
That's good. Good. I'm very tempted to pick up on the Scandinavian and the Finns. My second husband, his part of his family tradition was Finnish, so my kids, that's their tradition. But I won't. I will tell you one thing though, and this will illustrate something I'm going to point out later as well. We can reflect back on it. But I once told on a program at a storytelling festival, and I was on a panel with several, and we told stories, and the audience, of course, was great. And one of the other people on the program that day said to me, you know, it's always such a pleasure to tell to storytellers because they get it. They know when to laugh, when to applaud, when to stop. And it's just really great to tell to storytellers. And I'm having that same experience now with academics, that you're picking up on things that most people don't pick up on when I talk to them in terms of my choices and my presentation. I'm really glad I'm getting this input from you. It's very affirming. I appreciate it. But it's the same kind of thing of, yes, I'm with a good group that I have strong bonds with, and I like that very much. Let's talk more about you guys. More of what is in, you can talk about me if you need to. I'm not going to tell you you can't, but let's hear some more about what does your voice say about you, about your colleagues here, and what can your voice communicate, and what do you want it to? We'll talk about this for a few more minutes and then I'll go on. Or maybe we won't.
Could you clarify my colleagues? Because we're from all over. Some people here are in the same AUW branch, but other people we may know, but we don't live anywhere near one another or whatever. So
I'm thinking of people who've got education in your background and appreciate it and care enough about it that you have an ongoing relationship.
Okay, so I was just trying to define what you meant by
and
by
that's
colleagues,
where I'm getting the kinship right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Okay,
I think
everybody, yeah, Elaine, go ahead.
one issue that probably is more a challenge for women is being emotional, perhaps when you're talking about something that you're passionate about, and learning how to choose the right time to use that and not appear weak by becoming emotional. I think that is something that women need to think about probably more than men. And it certainly can be a strength, but sometimes it's perceived as a weakness in presenting yourself.
That's interesting because storytellers are very concerned about breaking down on stage. A lot of storytellers tell personal stories. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the program. And sometimes they're still raw from the experience. And it's not a very effective way to communicate. Your audience, whoever is listening to you tell, always wants to feel comfortable with you that you're going to get them back to, you're going to get them out of your story when it's time. And when they see people getting really involved emotionally, it shakes that confidence. I mean, your audience always wants you to succeed, but they're always kind of alert to maybe it's not going to happen. If you are too raw and your own emotions bleed into your stories, that can really undercut your effectiveness. That would be a whole other program. And I don't have one ready. I mean, I know a lot about it because we work on it all the time. I haven't prepared anything to talk, and I would be very glad to come back and talk about that at another time because it's very important. A lot of storytellers are very, very critical when they think that somebody else is doing their therapy on stage. And that's how it's talked about. So it's a very important issue. And there are ways, I've done it myself. I tell a story about my mother that I used to be very emotional about it. And I had to get past it because it would not have worked. And it wasn't working when I was immersed in those feelings. The feelings were why I was telling the story in the first place, but I had to complete them before I was able to complete the story. Yes, Paula, please.
Hi, I have done grief support groups at my church for years now. I'm a counselor, although I also have a human resources background, and I just came out with a new book, actually. And I used to get very choked up whenever I'm talking about something important. Value-wise, I get kind of choked up. I don't break down or anything, but you can hear it in my voice. And also sometimes when I would talk about certain people in my life, if I'm speaking to a group, I would, you could hear the catch in my voice, and I wouldn't lose it, but you could hear that emotion until I read something that said, when that happens, you are taking the focus off the listeners and you are having them attend to you non-verbally, obviously, but some of them are sitting there wondering like, okay, is she going to break down? Is she going to lose it? You know, and I don't want to make them uncomfortable. And so talking about it more helped me get used to talking about it. And for some reason, I'm finding that it's not happening that often anymore, which I'm relieved. But when I learned, when I read something and it said, you're taking the focus off of giving to your audience and you're putting the focus on you, I thought that is not what I want to do.
That's a really apt principle. I appreciate you bringing it to us. Thank you. Can we move on to Mary Ann?
Yes,
Oh,
I'm thinking as I was listening to Paula that one thing we do want to communicate is passion, and yet you don't. It has to come across, but you can't be so emotional that your content gets lost in the conversation.
That's very good. Yeah, so passion is definitely one thing that you're going to have going for you, and you do want to get it across. That's probably something you want to put into your voices for a lot of you. Paula, did you have more to say? I wanted to get to Mary Ann, and I should have checked with you first.
No, I was finished. Thank you.
That was a really good point you made too.
Well, and I like the point that someone just made after me too, which is
Mary Ann.
You take the focus away from the content you're trying to deliver. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. And any other characteristics, qualities that you might like to pack into your voice or that you already see there? Okay, it's kind of hard to pull this up. We'll be going into techniques later for how you can actually get to some of these things. So let's go on. We have identified a few characteristics that you can put into your voices, that you find in your voices. And I guess I want to point out that for the most part, it's positive stuff, but that makes sense. It's positive, it's sympathetic, it's appealing, it's agreeable. And that makes sense because you want to draw people to you. You want to influence them. So of course you want to make a good impression. And to do that, you're going to showcase appealing, attractive characteristics. But even as you make and present a view of yourself that's appealing and attractive, you want to be careful not to perform any radical surgery on your personality. You don't want in any way to denature what you're really about. You don't have to. You've got qualities like passion, like experience, like knowledge that will stand you in good stead. You don't have to manufacture anything that isn't really part of who you are and what you represent. The other thing that's going on is the person you present is the person you promise to be. So make sure that you present yourself accurately. Be yourself. One thing to keep in mind is everybody else is already taken. But besides the stuff of an irreverent kind of wisecrack, think about sustainability. What can happen if you present somebody other than who you really are? What is likely outcome? Well, whenever you revert to what you really are, who you really are, and what you really represent, well, you risk that you'll diverge from the expectation you've established. You could disappoint people. You could not work out. Alternatively, you could probably try to live into somebody else indefinitely for the long term, and then you're just going to exhaust yourself. That won't work out either. The characteristics we're talking about, they're appealing, they're attractive, they're also accurate. Now, a few caveats. Let me think of a few caveats. Oh, yes. You're probably going to aspire to appeal universally, but you'll have to recognize and accept that you won't captivate everybody. That's okay. Let the contrarians go. Let them fall by the wayside. Work with whoever stays with you. Just like any other professional, whether it's a performer, whether it's an athlete, play to your strengths. And your strengths are going to be who you are and what you represent. And you can be calm, you can be comfortable, you can be confident. Now, your poise itself may actually appeal to some people and attract them, and maybe they'll come around. And as far as the persistent critics, well, over time, they might come to find your merits. And if they do join you at a later time, you will, of course, welcome them. Finally, if you sense a disconnect or any kind of an issue between portraying yourself accurately and portraying yourself appealingly, please try to deal with the delta seriously, deeply, strategically. Don't just try to manage it as you explore your voice. You can't just manage something like that operationally or tactically. It's not really a cosmetic thing. So those are some of the pointers I wanted to lay out at the beginning. And now we can start to focus on putting it together so we can find your voice and figure out how to use it consistently whenever you speak. You told me about how I'm not pausing and stumbling around, and now I'm losing some of the things I wanted to tell you, but I have really good notes here. So you want to put it together, and you want to sound like yourself whenever you speak. No matter what you talk about, no matter why you're speaking or whatever your content is, you want it to sound like it's coming from you. So how do you go about that? Where do you start? Well, you start with 3 questions. First of all, which of your attributes do you want your voice to signify? Second, where in your experience and in your life do you find those attributes? And third, how can you inject those attributes into your communications whenever you speak? So the first thing you want to do is think about these questions and then keep in mind your answers as you work to develop your voice. So think about which of your qualities do you want to convey. You need to find them. You need to feel them. And we will get back to feeling them in a little bit. And you need to identify them. Well, where do you look for these qualities? Well, you look at your own stories, your own personal autobiographical stories that relate moments in your life when you functioned well. Where were you? What were you doing? What did other people do? What challenges, what obstacles did you conquer? What triumphs did you achieve? I encourage you to build an inventory of brief autobiographical anecdotes so that you can tell something engaging, interesting, and appealing about yourself at any time. Now, these anecdotes will quickly take you past the small talk that they mimic, because you won't just tell people your stories. You'll actually exchange stories with them, because people frequently respond to your stories with their own stories. So you'll reach them, but you'll also learn about people, you'll connect with them, you'll find next steps and things you have in common. And of course, your autobiographical inventory will contain memories that you can mine for the incidents and for the qualities that you want to inform your voice. And I will point out that earlier today, when I talked to you about telling to the storytellers and remarking that they know how to respond, and I had that same sort of feeling with this group, where our common bond is education and university or college experience. That's an example of how stories beget other stories. Now, I wish I could give you a step-by-step procedure for finding your qualities, finding your stories that you can pack into your voice. I wish I could tell you this, but I can't. You're going to have to find your own way. My own process involves me immersing myself in my content, in my stories, until something, whether it's serendipity or inspiration, or maybe just boredom with the void, something starts to get me making connections, making insights, developing thoughts and content, and coming up with things that ultimately I might be able to use. Now, I know this sounds radically fuzzy. I'm sort of reminded, there was a cartoon, I think it was in the New Yorker, it's got to be 40 years ago. It shows two scientists in front of a blackboard. And of course, today it would be a whiteboard. But they're in front of this board, and there's two clusters of circles and arrows and symbols and equations and notations and all kinds of scientific and mathematical stuff. And these two clusters flank a schematic of a cumulus cloud in the middle. And the caption says, "Here occurs a miracle." So you're going to have to figure out how to make your own miracles occur. And these memories, these thoughts, these anecdotes come back. And we'll talk about capturing them. That's one of the things we're going to do a little bit later. So after you figure out what it is you want to convey through your voice, what you want to ooze out, as it were, then you have to make it happen. Not explicitly through your content, but implicitly and oozily. Now, some of us, including me, a lot of us have problems communicating about ourselves or thinking, recognizing we're doing so. You seem to be picking up a lot, and I appreciate that. But some of us kind of have a problem communicating about ourselves without making that our content, without speaking about ourselves. I call that not me content. And when I have to deliver not me content, I frequently start by thinking about the voice I'm speaking in. What are the qualities I'm trying to get across? And of course, they're the same time to time to time. What are the qualities I need to get across? And then after I think about them, I try to feel them. And while I'm thinking them and feeling them, then I try to see how can I externalize them and push them out into my tone of voice, into my facial expression, my stance, my movements. You've also pointed out that it comes through in the vocabulary you choose. And all these techniques that don't, vocabulary is close to content, but it's still a little different. And all these techniques help you get your voice constructed. Now, I know this is still radically fuzzy, so I'm just going to try to give you a few more pointers and tips, and then we'll start doing some discussion and working on your own voices. Now, in the first place, I would encourage you, as you develop your voice and you're working on it consistently and exploring it, try it out and see how it works on other people. Now, product developers today frequently develop and construct what they call a minimum viable product, an MVP. They'll construct it, they'll push it out into a market, try to get feedback from potential users that they can use to change if they need to make it more effective in the marketplace. Storytellers also do something similar. Storytellers frequently explore ideas and concepts and even stories in process or in change. They'll explore them with coaches and storytelling peers and get feedback, input. And you too can get input from your peers, your colleagues, other people who are concerned with developing a voice. Try it out in front of them. See how well your voice is communicating who you are and what you represent. Because the people you can work with would be people who already have an external view of you. So you can get this feedback from colleagues and other people. And when you get the feedback, of course, you want to process it, digest it, apply it, and if necessary, you will change course to some extent. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about is I know that you're going to want to come up with a characteristic forever voice that you can count on all the time to represent you. However, I want to caution you, accept change. Don't resist it. Don't fight it. As you begin to explore your voice and you get feedback from other people, of course, you're going to change what you do to present your voice, to develop it. But even when you think you're onto a good voice, it'll change over time along with you. And that change, that journey, enriches who you are and what you represent. It enriches you as a person, and it enriches your voice. So go with it. And you don't have to fret that people who knew you when will no longer recognize you. They will continue to know you, continue to recognize you, even as you and your voice change and evolve. Remember what I said earlier on about a level of personal continuity. So that's my message. That's what I wanted to give to you. I know it's an ambitious program, and I know you can do it. You can develop an appealing voice that represents you accurately. And then when you communicate with that voice, it will reveal who you are and what you represent so that you can reach people and connect with them and influence them. And we will work a little bit on developing voice going forward, but now would be a good time for discussion or questions before we bring up the worksheet. So you can unmute yourself and make comments or ask questions before we go into the next phase. Okay, if nobody wants to take advantage of that opportunity now, maybe as we go on, the rest of this is going to be in a much more discussion-friendly mode. I've talked about two related concepts. One is what qualities, yeah, Nancy, you have to unmute.
I find that I have different voices in different circumstances, but I'm still me. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I'm saying when I was an educational diagnostician, that was one voice I had. When I was going through cancer, that was another voice I had with my doctor and her staff. And there are just different voices at different times. The essence of me is always there, but I'm in different positions in those situations.
You are sketching out an even more ambitious program. You're talking about advanced voice. Yes, when you have very different aspects and you're communicating in different circumstances, yes, you do want to segment this way, but that involves knowing not only what you're about and what you're representing, but what your goals and what your objectives are in each situation, and which of your characteristics will apply when, and then how to get them across. You're in graduate school on this already. So I didn't want to go that far at this point, but
I'm sorry.
No, that's great. I mean, you're there. I felt I was already giving you something very ambitious, but you're actually taking next steps and taking it farther. I appreciate that. I'm glad you pointed it out. Yeah, Monica.
Oh no, well, my thought based on what Nancy just shared is that in a day, do we have different voices as we are dealing with different constituents, throughout the day. So as an educator, my voice is different when I'm communicating with students. My voice is different when I'm talking to a faculty. My voice is different when I'm talking to staff, right? In terms of my voice is different when I'm talking to my daughter, right? So I'm just, Nancy just made me just think about that, like how my voices changes during the day, and how am I perceived based on that voice. I don't know. I'm just that thought is still in my head, and I'm not articulating it more. But I think I want to think more about on this topic, how my
Okay.
voices are changing.
Yes, these are very valid observations. And as I say, you're taking the ideas much farther than I was planning to push them today, but you're ready for them. So that's great. Some people are, some people might not be. Definitely, you're not always going to be the same carbon copy every place you go. If you're just starting out, you do want to get down to the basics. You want to find out what's your signature, what's your brand, what's going on with you all the time. And then, of course, you'll tailor it depending on the situation. And it might be that the content tailors the voice a little bit more in various situations. So maybe you get more of an interaction between your content and your voice. I should say between your content and your role as communicator. And they're separate, but of course they're connected because they're the two sides of the same coin. So you can't really have one without the other, and they go in tandem, but you can work on them separately or together depending on what your needs are. That's great. Nancy, your hand is still up. Do you have more to say? Your hand is down. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, where I was going then is that you can either start with stories and build up your story inventory of anecdotes about things you've done in your life, and then mine them for different qualities and characteristics that you want to get into your voice. Or you can identify your characteristics and then find stories to go with them. And once again, it's really just two sides of the same coin. So it doesn't matter which way we're going to go. Because we didn't want to get into the complexities of breakout rooms and report backs, we thought we would just work together in the large group session with a tool I've developed called the Storytelling Voice Worksheet. And Elaine has put it up online. It's really just, it's very much tied to the things I was talking about today. It's, you can make as many copies of this as you want. And it's a way to organize and capture your thoughts so that you can compare them and extract out your qualities and also build a little anecdote that you can tell. So we start with prompts. They're not the only point of departure, but I would recommend that you think of times in your life you felt you could do anything, nothing could stop you, or things you've done well that you really enjoy, that make you feel good and confident, your triumphs, your obstacles overcome. So you can think along any of these lines or other lines if you want to get yourself going. And this worksheet then directs you, if you just follow it top to bottom, to think about an episode, a memory, an anecdote that goes along with the prompt, and then go into the characteristics and qualities that you find in the anecdote. And then you try to figure out, how can I get that across outside of my content? Not just telling the story, which you will do it sometimes, but how can you extract and externalize those qualities and get them into your voice? Once again, your voice and your content always complementing each other and coming together in tandem. So I think that the worksheets have been distributed to everybody. So you can have them, you can make copies of them and work with them as you want. What I'd like to do, I'm going to put the timer on. How long are we going to go, Kate or Elaine?
We can go like another 15 minutes.
Okay.
To allow people time to think about it and share.
Okay, what I'd like to do, okay, I've got 8:24 now. So another 15 minutes is about 20 to 9. Okay, so is that 20 to 9 our drop dead end, or is that when we start to share?
I think that would be the end. I mean, people are
Okay, so,
expecting about an hour.
okay. So let me then just turn you loose on these sheets for about 5 or 6 minutes. You can work them in any order you want, in any sequence. Just try to think of things in your life and the qualities that they illustrate and embody. And then the next step would be how you can get this across, even when you're talking about something else. And we'll go till about 8:30, 8:32, and then we'll do some sharing and we'll wind down. So does anybody want to make any comment before I turn you loose for about 6 or 7 minutes? Okay, I will put the timer on and we'll get back in about 6 or 7 minutes. So see where this worksheet takes you. Okay, I think I was talking on mute. Can you hear me? Can somebody let me know?
Yes.
Okay,
You,
all right.
you have found your voice.
I have found my voice. Yes. All right, so it's time to wrap it up. Finish making any notes you're making. We can do a little bit of debriefing and sharing. First of all, did anybody have any experience or thoughts that you want to just make sure you get out? I don't want to ask any questions without giving you a chance just to set the agenda yourself. Anybody have any thoughts that you want to communicate to everybody? Any content? Okay, go ahead.
I have an example if no one else is going.
Please, yes, that's what I was going to go for next, yes.
When I was a junior in college, a friend and I, we were French majors, and we decided that we were going to sign up to work abroad during the summer as nannies in a French household. And, you know, we had studied French for 7 years, but we really felt that this would immerse us and prove that we really could think and converse in French. And so we were committed to this risk that neither one of us had been to France before. And we dealt with an agency that was going to link us up with families. And we had a few names of those families before we left. But what we didn't realize is that it was not finalized. And when we got there, we were faced with the challenge of going and interviewing at different families' homes in Paris. So we had to navigate Paris, find foreign locations, and converse in French to determine whether we liked the family and the family whether they liked us. So we determined that we would have to work as a team, and the one person would conduct the interview and the other person would be translating and recording the content. And we were able to successfully do that to help each other identify a family that we thought we wanted to work for. And I think the qualities that demonstrated to me was I'm willing to accept a medium level of risk if I'm able to prepare and research before I undertake a project. The other quality is that I enjoy teamwork in working with a fellow colleague. And it was necessary for us to meet this challenge as well. And then having confidence in our abilities in French and navigating a foreign city, and personally assessing the people that we met in each household.
Wow, that's quite a story. That's a great story for your inventory. Let me ask, well, we're not all in the same shared space, so it's going to be kind of hard to do this, but did anybody else like not even know this about Elaine? Find something brand new about her? I'm seeing a few heads nodding in the windows. And yeah, Nan? Any comments?
Well, I don't know. As I said, these are folks I know them through meeting them at an AUW meeting, but we're not like neighbors or friends. We live in different towns. So I would not have known that. But then again, knowing that she was able to, as you have here, triumphs achieved and obstacles overcome, I do know that much about Elaine, that she could probably have made it a wonderful, memorable experience no matter what.
That's great. Yeah, especially if you don't know each other well, then you wouldn't know something about this. Did anybody note anything, other qualities in the story, from the story, that are things that could go into her voice, or things you didn't, that you want to make sure that she realizes are there to be mined? You know, challenges and risk and teamwork and getting things done, and any other qualities you see. I think it was very resourceful and inventive.
I think she hustled.
Yes.
I think she hustled. She went around a city that she was not familiar with. And I think that could be very intimidating.
That's certainly a story you can tell to establish how you deal with challenges. I mean, I know you're not in the job market or anything, but that's the story that tells a lot about you. Does any, go ahead.
I was going to mention, like, you know, one of the obstacles that she overcame was integrating into a new culture, which is huge. Even though you are studying a language for 7 years, culture is very different than a language. And the minute she mentioned that, and I was like really taken away from that, because you know, yes, you wanted to do something, but then really overcoming, like taking it to the next level of like, oh, no matter what, I am going to learn and be open to accepting anything to be there. For me, that was like, wow, I am really in awe of you know, that, because I don't know at what time, like how many years ago you did that, but yes, times now right now are different than maybe 20 years ago. You know, how people were not so open and accepting and ready to share or help, you know. So I was like in awe of you know, of that part of the story.
Thank you. Did anybody else find a story that you could share that would be that will become part of your inventory? Inventory is very important. Yeah, Nancy.
I was a high school guidance counselor many years ago, and a young man came into my office to tell me that he was upset because he was still a virgin, and his girlfriend was pressuring into him to have sex with her. So I said to him, if you're in the room with this old fat white woman talking about your virginity, that says to me you're not ready to make a decision about your virginity. And it's okay to be 17 years old, be a male, and be a virgin. You can wait. You don't have to make a decision this weekend or next month. You can wait. He said, you think it's okay, Mrs. H? And I said, I think it's fine. He said, okay. And he left my office. I saw him 2 months later. He came into my office and he said to me, this is a quote, Mrs. H, you're a fucking genius. And I said, okay. He said, how did you know that she was pregnant? And I said, I speculated that when a young lady is pressuring you to have sex, there's something else going on. He said to me, why didn't you tell me that? I said, because it was speculation. I didn't have fact. I didn't have a pregnancy test. So he said, okay. So he left my office. I have to tell you that my credibility among my students went up 100%. Number one, the one thing I did was I listened to him. I listened to him and I determined what I thought he needed me to say to him when I responded back to his answer to his question about was it okay to be a virgin. The other thing kind of fell in place because it was speculation on my part. So I think sometimes part of being a good storyteller is listening to the circumstances of what the story needs to reflect in what you're hearing from your audience.
So that's an insight about yourself that you pull out of that story. Yes, there are a lot of insights about you that are coming in there. Does anybody have any feedback for Nancy for the kinds of things about her they're finding in her story, besides her astute capabilities as a listener?
I do. I would add that, and I love that he called you Mrs. H, that somehow you must have exuded that you were a trustworthy adult for him to even walk in and ask that question.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's very clear. There's something about you that comes across. Now that's your voice at work. That's something you're doing already that's communicating. You can be trusted and you've got some good sense. So I think that's good. We are getting close to a quarter of, and I want to honor your time expectations. Does anybody have a final comment or conclusion or anything, especially anybody have any next steps you might be taking to continue working on your voice and your story inventory? Well, I hope you will. I encourage you to do so and get in touch with me. And I may be showing up in this meeting room in the future, not as a speaker, but as a listener as well. So maybe I'll see you again sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kate or Elaine, you want to conclude?
Oh, Susie, thank you very much. That was wonderful. Yes, I hope you'll come back as a speaker and as a listener. That would be great. As you've obviously got lots to say. And you've encouraged some of the audience to speak too.
Thank you. Yes, I've been very pleased to be here. This has been a wonderful experience for me.
And I know we went a little over the hour and people didn't run away, so that's good
A
news.
good sign.
Yes, that was a very good sign. That they
And
were
we'll make sure the worksheet is on the Jane Addams website as well, in case people have lost track of that email. But I think that's something we can use, you know, at different points in time with different audiences, like various people have mentioned. You have your professional person, and then you have your family, and you have your neighbors, all different kinds of, you reveal different features about yourself to the different groups. But it's all part of you, and it's a consistent package. It ties together. So thank you for everything and making us think about these aspects of ourselves and how we can demonstrate those traits.
I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and I welcome to hear from anybody at any time.